Zipper rolls out to the right, pitches off to Taylor, and Taylor's to the 20, down to the 15, down to the 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Billy Taylor scored a touchdown from 21 yards out. The crowd goes berserk. It was November 22nd, 1969. That they came to Barry, Michigan, all dressed in maize and blue. The words were said, the prayers were read, and everybody cried. But when they closed the coffin, there was someone else inside. Oh, they came to Barry, Michigan, but Michigan wasn't dead. And when the game was over, it was someone else instead. 11 Michigan Wolverines put on the gloves of gray, and as the organ played the victors, they laid Woody Hayes away. Under center is Wangler at the 45. He goes back. He's looking for a receiver. He throws downfield to Carter. Who's got it better than us? Nobody!
Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. It's nice to hear that football season opening again. I was beginning to wonder if we would have to wait until next spring or even next fall. It's great to have Michigan football back. Our scheduled guest today was Nick Baumgartner from The Athletic. We have moved him to next week's show, though. Joining us today will be the angel of the big house, Detroit News beat writer Angelique Chengelis. Before Angelique joins me, let's start as we always do with my view from Section 17. Sadly, I won't be able to occupy my seat in Section 17 this year. Instead, I'll settle for watching games from my lazy boy or pacing the floor and watching. Either way, I can't wait to get things started. It's been a roller coaster ride all year, not just for our favorite sports teams, but in our personal lives. 2020 has been a rough year, to put it mildly. When the Big Ten put out that schedule this summer and then postponed the season just days later, I think our collective hearts broke. We need sort of a break from masks, social distancing, no hugs, no handshakes, etc., etc., and sports at least diverts our attention from reality, if even for just a few hours. We need that, especially now. That's why I'm not a bit fazed by an 8-game schedule, starting play in October, and having virtually no one in the stadium, aside from the players, coaches, some media, and the referees. I'll take it, and I know you will too. Knowing Big Ten football is back gives us all hope, I think. Hope that we're going to beat this COVID-19 and fight our way through it on the way back to normal. My guest today says this will be a very different season for all involved, and who knows what's going to happen in the next 8 weeks. The Angel of the Big House joins us next on our Game Day segment as we prepare for a trip to Paul Bunyan country to take on PJ Fleck and his Golden Gophers on this week's edition of The Michigan Man, so stay with us. Here with us on our Game Day segment this week as we get ready for the opener. We don't know what to expect, but it is just great to have Big Ten and Michigan football back, isn't it, Angelique?
Oh my gosh, it really is, Mike. I mean, you're right. It's hard to believe we're saying here we are in October, heading to October 24th, and that's going to be the season start. But, last time we talked, I don't think we felt this optimistic. So, no, it's great. I mean, I'm really excited to see how this all goes and see how, I mean, just even from my perspective, how how do we cover these games? It's going to be very limited in the press box. They're only allowing, at least at some of these road venues, one person per outlet, and all Zoom interviews for post-game interview stuff. So it's all going to be different, but I'm glad we have something to cover and a season to cover, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how all of this goes.
Do you think what's been going on in the SEC and the ACC Sun Belt, the conferences that are playing right now, sort of give you an idea?
A little bit. I mean, I think that maybe, when we look back at this, maybe we all look and think, well, maybe the Big Ten did the right thing to wait and to see, wait for rapid testing and then they have a chance to get the logistics together. And they do. I'm sure they've observed what's going on in these other leagues, and particularly the SEC and the ACC and Notre Dame, and what's gone on with those schools. And I think in the end we're going to say there's probably a good idea to delay the start for the Big Ten and to get everything in place. And I don't think it's going to be perfect. You can't expect that in a pandemic. But I think that they've definitely kept their eye on what's been going on in the other leagues.
I guess the only thing I think about when you look at the late start like this is it's 8 games. That's great. But we really don't have that built-in bye week anymore, which that could get interesting.
That could get really interesting. And really it's been interesting to hear, talking to some of the position coaches and hearing them on different radio shows at Michigan, how they're handling keeping their personnel separated in team meetings. And I think Ed Warner was talking about his breakdown with 18 guys. He has 9 in one room and 9 in another. And he knows that if something happens, God forbid, that wipes out this offensive line for a couple games because they've tested positive, well, he's got another line that's ready to go and step in there. So, I can't imagine what it's been like for these coaches to think about this. This is something that no one has ever had to think about, and they've really had to emphasize. And you know what? Actually, I'm not sure they've had to emphasize to the players. Because I've talked to a couple more players more recently, Mike, and these guys are they're all, and the word they keep saying, we're bought in on what we have to do to stay safe. And they're all being very vigilant, and they're not going out. They're going to Bush's to buy groceries once a week. I think that's the excitement of their week of doing something other than going to football and taking classes and going to classes. So, but it's just changed the whole perspective and the way that all of them are approaching this. And it's changed for all of us. But I think for these guys who are getting ready to play football, it's taking it up to just a different level that I can't even quite imagine.
Well, it's going to be interesting to watch, but at least we get it kicked off, teed up, whatever you want to say, on Saturday night with a coast-to-coast game up in Minneapolis, which means there will be a lot of eyes on this Michigan football team, won't there?
Yeah, game day is going to be there, and I think I figured this would be a night game, Mike. I really did, and I think it's fitting. Who knows what these rankings are? We talked about preseason rankings, and that's essentially what these are, even though the other teams have played. So it's hard to know what Michigan looks like. It's hard to know what Minnesota looks like. But the pundits seem to think they're both pretty good. They're both top 25 teams, and I think this is a good way for Michigan to open. I know people are like, oh boy, this really stinks. They got to go on the road and play at Minnesota, but I think they want to get a test. They want to know where they are, and I think this is going to be a good one.
Well, it's going to be a good one for Joe Milton. Everyone that I talk to, Michigan fans, are just really amped up to see Joe under center starting Saturday night, but we have no idea what to expect from this young man, do we?
No, and that's the thing. Look. I've written stories, other people have written stories. There is a lot of hype around this guy. I talked to Devin Gardner, the former Michigan quarterback who worked with Joe a lot in the summer and raved about him and his skill set. And I don't think that's a stretch. I think everybody has seen his arm. Even if I've posted videos from bowl practices and you just see the arm strength. But I think we all know it's not just about arm strength. It's about accuracy, and it's about touch, and it's about chemistry with the receivers, and that's something that with all this time off, that he has worked on. And I thought it was interesting when we spoke to him before the bowl game. Gosh, that seems forever ago. He talked about taking leadership courses at Michigan. He had taken a couple the previous years, so he's worked on that. And I think Michigan fans have to be very patient with him. And he's operating behind an offensive line that replaces 4 starters. I think, you just got to give him a chance to get his feet wet and not be overly critical of decision making. If there are mistakes made, and there are going to be mistakes made, there always are. And I think that I'm really curious to see how he does. I think everybody is. Everybody's been very eager to see this talent on display and in a starting role. And but you got to just give this guy some breathing room. I think you got to give the whole team some breathing room. Any fan base in the Big Ten, because there's no spring ball, there's no off season. This has just been so unique, and give him a little break going into this and see where this goes.
Yeah, I don't think he has to be the man on Saturday, and I think that will sort of be the game plan, that just let him be a game manager, at least in this first appearance.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And look, I think Josh Gaddis wants this to be a dynamic offense and wants those receivers to get in it and wants Joe Milton to be a star. But I don't think you come out slinging it like people might expect in that first game, especially at night, and it's going to be cold. And but I think this is a chance. I think this is a chance for the running backs to really, everybody's been gushing about these running backs. I think this is a real chance for them to show what they have. And I'm not saying that they need to be conservative and just, run. But I think that's the way you get started on the road in a first game like this.
Well, there's so many questions with this offense right now. And other than Joe Milton, the offensive line is probably number one to me. We have Mayfield back, and there will be 4 new starters joining him. But most of them have logged playing time over the last few years. Still, they are the straw that stirs this drink. I know you and I have talked about those offensive lines before. That's where it all begins. But we're just not sure about this group yet either as far as their chemistry.
No, we don't know. And I've talked to a couple of those guys. I had a chance to talk to Andrew Vistardis, the new center. And, he feels like they, in this extended period away from football, essentially, without spring ball, and, they really made an effort, this offensive line group, to gel as much as they could virtually. Mm-hmm. And that's what all the position groups had to do. But it is, I think we could argue that it's probably more important for the starting 5 to have that kind of chemistry where they essentially finish each other's sentences. They're that close. And he said that they really did become that way. And even when Mayfield had opted out, they felt like they had Carson in there, and he was really coming along, and the chemistry is there, they say. But they're not going to say it's not there either. So we have to see how it looks. And again, I think it's going to be one of those situations where you can't expect too much with 4 new starters. You've got 2 guys who have had starts, Stuber and Hayes, but this is a new group, and you just got to give them a chance. And I agree with you. I would argue that's the bigger question mark than quarterback. And because if he doesn't have a starting 5 that's going to help him, then who cares what the quarterback can do? You need those guys up front. And but I keep saying this too, Mike. I've covered Michigan for a long time, and these guys look more the part than I've seen in a long time. They look like Michigan offensive linemen, size-wise, and they're athletic. I've been really since watching them at bowl practice again. That's the last time we saw them. I've been really interested to see how this line develops. And I remember talking to Ed Warner, just chit-chatting with him at the end of January at the Michigan high school coaches thing. And he agreed. He said, these guys are really talented. He goes, it's just a matter of how quickly they can really understand what it is we want them to do. And that comes with repetitions, and that wasn't there in the spring. So I just think everybody's going to be a little bit behind in that. And but that was particularly important for this offensive line. So again, I think it's about being patient with this group and letting them, they're going to have their issues, but see how they come along. And I just think they're going to be pretty good in the end. I really do think this group's going to be good.
Well, another group I think is going to be better than we think is that running back stable. I mean, for the better part of the last decade, we've had some nice running backs, but we've been missing that go-to kind of stud 20 carry a game kind of back, which we routinely got used to in Ann Arbor having, the man. Could we have that in this stable of backs, Angelique, or is this offense just sort of geared to, 2 or 3 guys getting time?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mike. I mean, I was watching Najee Harris at these Alabama games.
Yeah.
Gosh, what if he had come to Michigan? And that was the kind of back that, that's the guy who really becomes the breakout guy in a group like this. And obviously he's not here. He's in Alabama and doing quite well. But I agree. This is a really this is a diverse. I think it's a very talented group. I think Chris Evans is going to have a big year. Just a hunch. And Charbonnet. I mean, he's finally healthy, and I thought he ran hard last year. And speaking of running hard, is Haskins. And I think that guy is he's a difference maker too. But I really think this is going to be about Charbonnet and Evans. And I think that. Talking to Jay Harbaugh over these last couple of years, I think if they have a guy who emerges as the guy, they'll go with it. But I think we're just going to see a lot of combinations, and I think we see, maybe even Blake Corum, the very fast running the freshman comes in. You got Christian Turner back as well, who's still catching up. He had opted out, so he's still catching up. But I don't. I think Harbaugh, the big Harbaugh, Jim, he's about playing multiple backs.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that was Tyrone Wheatley's thing. I think he grew up in a time at Michigan where you had lead back and you rode that guy. And I think this philosophy is a little bit more play multiple guys. And again, in this COVID era, maybe that's what you do. You have to get these guys ready, so in case one of them has to miss out. I think that's a strategy that, I don't even know if it's a strategy, Mike, but it's something you have to consider is what if?
Mm-hmm.
And you got to have all these guys ready to go just in case. So I think we're going to see them all. But I do think Charbonnet and Evans kind of emerges as the 2 main guys.
Well, the receiving core is young, but it has talent. We're going to see Ronnie Bell, Giles Jackson, Mike Sanders still, and some other young players. From what we hear, some of the freshmen are making noise in camp. No Nico Collins. We've known that for some time. But the group that we do have has a lot of flyers in it, just unproven.
Right. And, I think that's sort of the theme of this offense, isn't it? Sort of unproven. And, except for the running backs. And I agree. I mean, Ronnie Bell's proven. And, you got Cornelius Johnson, who's, I think that there's a lot of talk about the lack of height. But, he's a taller guy. These guys are fast. And that's what we're seeing, too, when we're watching these SEC games is look how fast these receivers are. And where was Josh Gaddis before he came to Michigan? He was at Alabama. So, this is what he wants. He wants fast. And would everybody want to see Nico Collins and what he could do? Absolutely. But I think that this is a very athletic group. Led by Ronnie Bell. I mean, is their emotional leader and their on the field leader. And but I think Giles Jackson is a really exciting guy to watch, and so is Sanders still. And I think that these young guys, you're right. They bring a level of speed that Josh Gaddis wants to establish in his wide receiver room. But again, it's is Joe Milton going to get them the ball? Is it going to be an effective chemistry and combination there once they put it all together on the field in an actual game setting? These are all the question marks. But it's been interesting to talk to the receivers. We've had a chance to talk to Ronnie and Giles and Sanders still, and talking about working with Milton. And a lot of them, again, in this downtime, I guess you call it, without football and during this pandemic, they've gotten together, Milton and the receivers, just working individually, looking at film together and throwing together. So they've been trying to develop this on their own when they can, and then carried it over once practices started. So it's really going to be about this whole chemistry. Can it work? And, we know it's a cliche. All 11 have to be working. If one person makes a mistake, well, that's very true. And I think that's something they feel like when Michigan did not take a pause in practice and kept going, that's something that they were able to develop all this time.
Well, Josh Gaddis has had a year to get his offense and his philosophy in place, sort of. We did not have spring practice, so that has to be taken into consideration. But should we expect a better and more efficient year from this offense, Angelique?
I don't know. I'm afraid to say, yeah, you should expect this or that, because, again, we just don't know. We don't know how Joe Milton's going to react in games. We don't know how this offensive line is, how quickly it's going to gel. But I think, yes, with that in mind, with having the consistency of an offensive coordinator back for the second year, for these guys understanding what he wants. You know, you had Chris Evans, who missed all of last year, who wasn't in the playbook, and he had to learn it. And I know Jay Harbaugh was raving about how quickly he really picked up on everything. And you've got these freshmen, these quick receivers who are coming in. They have to learn this all too. But you've got guys who've been there and know what he wants. And, it's just a matter of individually how quickly do they get going at game speed. And because I think they all do know the playbook and they all know what he wants. And Ed Warner certainly knows what Josh Gaddis wants and has been coaching his offensive line for that, to achieve that. And it's just about how quickly are these guys going to get it at game speed. But expectations, it's hard to say that anybody should have expectations going into the season. I mean, it's just this one is just so hard to read, Mike,
right,
because of all the, not having everything that you normally have going into a season.
So on offense, we know we have to be patient, and what really helps an offense as they get it together is a defense. And Don Brown has been just unbelievable since he's been at Michigan. I know a lot of fans will say, well, what about Ohio State? What about Wisconsin? And a few other games. But that aside, we can usually count on this defense and Don Brown coming up with great game plans.
Yeah, I mean, and I think Don Brown has been, he's got a couple new position coaches he's had to work with this year, but you're right, and I think he kept talking. The last time we spoke to him a few weeks ago, he kept talking about playing to the defense's strength, which I think is a common theme. And the strength of this defense is its front seven. I mean, they've had to replace Lavert Hill and Ambry Thomas now at the corners, so the back end is going to be a little bit newer. But that front seven is pretty dominating, at least from what they've said. I mean, Aiden Hutchinson and Kwity Paye at the ends will be pretty fearsome, and you got some pretty strong linebackers in Cam McGrone and Josh Ross and probably Michael Barrett at Viper. So they feel good about what they have there. And talking about not beating Ohio State and not winning big games, it was one thing. I had a long conversation with Aiden Hutchinson earlier this summer about that, Mike, and he said that has been the absolutely main focus. And talking about it, I said, well, is there a mental block about Ohio State? And he said, oh, absolutely. And they've worked with a captain, a former Navy SEAL, and they've worked on adjusting their mental approach. And he said sometimes guys get overwhelmed. They go into these games and they know what's on the line. They know that they haven't beaten Ohio State. And all this works up, and he said if you just look at game film, it's usually in those big plays against Wisconsin last year, big plays against Penn State in the first half, and Ohio State, it's usually one guy missing an assignment, and he said he wasn't immune to that either last year. He made mistakes, and that allows for these big plays, and that's something that they've really been focused on. And I think that Don Brown's coaching it, but these guys are trying to do it on their own, talking to people about how to get their mindset straight. And so I'm curious to see how they're going to rise to that level in these big games, because that's been the big focus over these 5 years. And it does in a lot of ways start with defense and how they approach these games. So this is a good one for the defense to come out playing at Minnesota and see where Don Brown has them.
It absolutely is. And you just mentioned Aiden Hutchinson, who we've been hearing a lot from over the summer. And when you look at that defense, are there two better bookends in the Big Ten right now, better than Aiden Hutchinson and Kwity Paye?
I don't think so. And that's what Sean Nua has said. He said the best he's ever coached, and Don Brown saying something similar about just how good they are, and that he wouldn't want anybody else than these two. Aiden he is so focused on improving his game, and he really wanted this season for a lot of reasons. Obviously, going into his junior year, he needed this season if he's going to make that jump to the NFL. And then you've got Kwity Paye, who could have left, and he kept saying he came back because he wanted to play, he wanted to do this again, and these guys are supremely motivated, and it's been they're very focused on technique and the particulars and the details, and I think that it's great for them, but it's also the whole lead by example thing. They're definitely leaving their mark on the younger players about what you need to do to get to this level. And no, we haven't seen them play yet this year in 2020, but I don't think there's anything that's suggesting that they won't have breakout big seasons. Not breakout, they had very good seasons last year, but bigger seasons, and the seasons that they expect to have. So, from all accounts, and talking to Aiden and talking to Kwity, they feel really good about where their games are.
And as far as the defensive front, I think most of the preseason magazines have been pretty consistent, and they think that there are a lot of depth questions, talent questions, and I disagree with that on that defensive line. But, you've got Carlo Kemp back, Chris Hinton, Mozzie Smith making noise. We're hearing Donovan Jeter's having a big camp. This group could be a lot better than we think, Angelique.
Oh, I do too. I absolutely think this is going to be a mammoth defensive line, and in terms of depth too, as you pointed out, this is a very motivated group, and I think they know that with an offense that's finding its way, with a new quarterback and a new offensive line, that this team is going to rely on defense, not just at the start of the year, but probably throughout the year. And Don Brown has looked at these early season games, the SEC and the ACC and the other games, how high scoring they've been, and how important defense is going to be going forward in the Big Ten season. That you can't have these inflated scores; it's just going to kill defenses. So, Don Brown wants to control things, wants to control the games, and so do these players. And I think that it starts up front, and boy, I think this is, I totally agree with you. I think this is a very, maybe I don't want to say very deep defensive line, but this is a deep defensive line and talented. And starting with the guys you mentioned, Kemp and Hutchinson and Paye and whoever that wild card's going to be, Jeter or Hinton. This is a very talented group, and they're definitely going to be the tone setters for this team.
Well, behind that big and talented front, we have McGrone and Josh Ross in the linebacking crew. I'm just fine with that. I think we're going to be really good at the linebacking core. In the secondary, a lot of analysts point out that Ambry Thomas is gone, so a lot of talent vying to take over his position. But in general, there seem to be some doubts about the secondary. How do you see it?
Yeah, there are some doubts. About the corners. I think people respect Hawkins and Dax Hill for sure at the safeties, but it's a matter. I thought Vincent Gray came on pretty well. He had some big moments last year where he got some playing time. I think it was the Illinois game. He came in and played quite a bit. I might have that wrong, but he, I thought he acquitted himself well. And it's the other position, the other corner, is Green good? They've talked a lot about him, and now they've made a position change and trying to shore that up a little bit as well with Faustin. So moving from safety to corner. So that makes you a little like, maybe they're not quite sure what they've got there. But they have to shore it up. And I think that's probably a legitimate concern. And again, why the front seven really needs to be on its toes and to take some pressure off those guys as much as possible while they get their feet wet. But I think the safety should be pretty good. And I'm going to be really curious to see how Vincent Gray comes out, because I think he's good. There's been a lot of talk about him and how well he's getting it, he was going to be the starter going into the season anyway. So it's just going to be really, really curious how they're going to figure out the other spot.
Yeah, it really is. It'll be interesting to see as the season goes along what they do at that corner. What I'm really excited to see, though, is Dax Hill. This kid is a 5-star. It's his sophomore year. Played a lot last year. And the way Don Brown talks about him, it's just, he's probably the best cover guy in the Big Ten. I was surprised when he said that. Great athlete, but it will be interesting to watch him this year. I expect big things from him.
I do too. I think we're going to be writing about him a lot and talking about him a lot. And it's this is why people want to see 5-stars, right? They want to see how they actually turn out on the college level. And I think he's a guy who's determined to do that. And seeing him at times last year, I thought he did bring a spark, even the special teams. I mean, he's a difference maker for sure. And so I know that there was some talk, maybe he's going to move to corner, but that's not what his plan is. And he'll lock down at safety and a nickel. And he's a guy who I think that they could. I don't know. Maybe they have bigger plans for him going forward in the final couple of years, maybe next year. But I think he's going to be really exciting to watch. He's a great athlete, and it's hard to get a great athlete off the field. I'd like to see him in more situations, but who knows? Maybe I'm just being stupid about that. But
no, I don't think you are. I mean, I'm excited to see what he's going to do this year. You're right. He should not come off the field, and we really need that kind of guy in the secondary that's a game changer. We have not had that for a long time. I mean, a true game changer, have we?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And that's where, I think you can, again, defense sets the tone for me for most games. And he's a guy who I think can complement that front seven. I mean, you've got Quiddy and you've got Aiden, but then you've got Dax Hill. And it's not that people are not talking about him enough, but he's a little bit under the radar, and so is Hawkins. I mean, Hawkins is a guy that at the NFL Combine, when we're talking to players, Michigan players, about who could be surprising, a couple of them said Hawkins, and he does feel like he's under the radar. And with that kind of chip, with how that can motivate, so you've got those two guys who I think who could be really. I think they're going to be guys who are going to make a difference, but certainly Dax Hill just takes it to a different level.
Well, this Saturday night, as we mentioned at the top, we open in Minneapolis, a coast-to-coast game against PJ Fleck's Gophers. And they have some starters to replace, but not a lot. 14 or 15 coming back from last year. And this is a very good football team, isn't it, Angelique?
It is. I mean, and that's the kind of offense that I think is going to be a great challenge for this defense to see where it is, to see how good it is. And they've got the quarterback back and their receiver who opted back in, and their offensive line is big, and we know what PJ Fleck likes to see from his offense. And but what are we going to see? I mean, at this point, is the offense going to be ahead of the defense like we've seen in the other leagues? That's what I'm really what I'm curious about is with this time off and with the delay, for the Big Ten, and they've seen what other teams have been doing and these offensive numbers, do they know that they've got to get out there quickly with their defense? And I think that plays to Michigan's strength. And the strength of the team is its defense, that front seven. And it's going to be, I think this is a great challenge for them to go into Minneapolis on the road, playing an offense that can be very exciting, and a receiver who, the receiver of the year in the Big Ten, and a guy who can do a lot of things. So I think it's going to be, they got to neutralize him. It'll be a great test for this defensive line going up against this offensive line. So I think we're going to learn a whole lot about where this defense is. And, their defense is, it's good. I mean, I don't think it's fearsome. And maybe this is the right defense for Joe Milton to get his feet wet against in this offensive line. But to me, this is all going to be about what the defense does, Michigan's defense does.
Well, there's been a lot of talk about it being a road opener for Michigan, and the road record, especially in big games, has not been good for a long time. We know that, but this year, there are no fans in those stadiums. Does that take away from the home field advantage, in your opinion?
I think it does. I mean, that's why when I've looked ahead at this season going, how do I pick games? it's hard with Wisconsin and Penn State coming to Ann Arbor. It's like, well, it's not a home field in Michigan Stadium either. And I do think that's going to factor in. And I've watched a lot of tennis, and it's those tennis players feed off the fans just like football players do. And there were some matches where it's just like, boy, I think the fans would have made a difference here. And same thing at some of these football games, but a lot of these teams have had fans. So you get some noise piped in, and a smattering of fans, and you get some I think home field advantage in those teams. But this is going to be different. You're going to have some families there, and that's it. And I don't see how there's going to be a home field advantage. I think there's obviously a challenge in traveling and the logistics and getting people in a hotel and all of that. But they're used to that. But they're going to walk into a stadium where there's not going to be any screaming and yelling fans at you and people calling out your mother and your sister and your cousins and what they do at some of these games. So I think that totally negates it. But it goes for Michigan Stadium as well. It's just not going to have that same feel.
No, and it's only I hate to say it's only one game, but when you play 8 games this year, every game is very, very big, isn't it?
Every game is huge, and you can't let up. I mean, if you're Ohio State, Penn State, you just can't let up. And it definitely makes. I kind of like this. I kind of like that the season's a little bit shorter, and it makes things even more important. Every game is just vital, and not that it's not in other seasons, but gosh, I mean, you can't slip up. You really can't. And I like this. It's been. I'm not sure I want it to be like this forever, but I think it's going to be kind of fun to see how teams adjust, and the teams we think are going to be strong. How do they deal with it too? There's going to be a lot of pressure to just not make mistakes, to be mistake free, and to get out the quick leads. I think that's going to be a very big part of this too. And I just think defenses really have to step up. I think they've seen now from these other games that this is just where it's at. You just got to have a defense up here that can stop these offenses, because they're definitely ahead of the game. That's not usually the case when a season starts.
If they can step up Saturday night, that will be huge, give the offense time to grow. So we shall see. But final question for you, Angelique. I was looking over one of the previews on Saturday night, and there was a story about Michigan coaches having immense success in year 6. And we know it's year 6 for Jim. But given COVID and, an 8-game schedule and so many new starters, should we expect that kind of a breakout year for Jim Harbaugh and have those kind of expectations?
Well, I don't think it's unreasonable. It is year 6. They've valued, they've talked about, they never stopped. They never took a pause. They kept practicing, and these guys feel ready. There was a reason for that. I mean, Jim Harbaugh didn't want them to stop competing. He wanted them to stay sharp. He wanted to play football. And, I think it's not unfair to have expectations of him. They've got a tough schedule. They open on the road, they close on the road at Ohio State, and then you've got that bonus game, I guess you call it, the crossover seeded game in Game 9. But, yeah, I mean, he's got to have some success. He's got to win some of these big games on the road. We'll have a different field because there's no fans, of course. But, when you talk to these guys, they all say, we don't care if there are no fans. They just want to play. And in the end, how much do they hear the fans? They probably do, and does it motivate them? Sure. But they're also capable of playing these games without fans, and the motivation is enough that they want to get these wins. They want to get to a Big Ten championship game. And year 6, absolutely, I think there should be pressure on Jim Harbaugh. I'm not saying hot seat kind of pressure if he doesn't do this, but just yes. I mean, this is time. He's got a pretty good defense, and I think we've seen that before at Michigan, that a pretty good defense can go a long way. And if Josh Gaddis could get Joe Milton working behind an offensive line that needs time to gel, then that's a bonus. But it's hard to keep saying, well, it's this or that. Everybody's had the COVID issue, Mike. Everybody's had issues. Everybody's had players opt out. It's a whole new ball game on a different level, and I think it's absolutely fair to have expectations.
Well, there are a lot of questions about this team. We will begin getting answers on Saturday up in Minneapolis, and I think we're all excited. We thank beat writer Angelique Chengelis from the Detroit News for joining us. Always great stuff, Angelique. Odd to be doing the pregame with you in October to start this season, but as always, thanks for joining us, and we'll get together for the Ohio State game during the Christmas season when we preview that game.
I know, I was waiting for that. Yeah, you better. I hope the introduction to the podcast has carols or something. I mean, it's going to be pretty bizarre, but I'm really glad we're talking about it. I really, really am glad we're talking about college football in the Big Ten and getting this season going for sure.
Angelique, again, thanks for your time, and we look forward to that next visit.
Thank you, Mike.
On Quick Hits today, no injury news to report, which is good. I don't think Jim Moore or his staff have even addressed the topic since practice started, though. As Angelique said, access to the staff and players will be very restricted this year. Jim's pressers and even post-game interviews will be done via Zoom. It's our new normal, at least for this year. I took a peek at the game time forecast for Saturday night, and it's great football weather, especially if you're from northern Minnesota. It will be dry with temps in the upper 20s at kickoff. When we do our visitors edition on Thursday, we'll check up on the weather once again, see if anything's changed. Of course, game day will be in Minneapolis Saturday, and the game's going to be featured nationwide on ABC. We are starting the season on the big stage, and I can't wait. I know you feel the same way. This week begins our season schedule of 2 weekly shows. On Tuesdays, our Michigan Game Day show, with one of our beat writers or broadcasters. Then on Thursdays, our visitors edition with the beat writer or radio play-by-play voice of our opponent. So make sure you come back on Thursday when we'll be joined by the radio play-by-play voice of the Golden Gophers, Mike Grimm. We've had him on before. He's a great guy, so make sure you join us. That will do it for now, though. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Until we meet again on Thursday, take care, and as always, go Blue.
Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!